How J.C. Penney made his first $1,000. James C. Penney's first job paid him $2.27 a month. 32 years later, he was the successful head of a great business with more than 1,000 partners. He was just the average small-town country boy. Was it luck? Not at all. It was a combination of enthusiasm, vision, and singleness of purpose, backed up by work. He admits that hard work alone will not bring you success. But hard work and a definite goal will do the trick. After clerking for some time in a store owned by T.M. Callahan and his partner, young Penny was offered a chance to become a partner in the business with a new store to manage. His savings amounted to $500, not nearly enough. But the two partners agreed to lend him the additional amount needed at 8%. However, Penny was shrewd for his years, so he shopped around and found he could borrow the amount from a bank at 6%. The new store opened 14 April 1902 with a capital of $6,000, a third of which was Penny's. It was a success from the start. The sales for the first year amounted to $28,891.11 and Penny's share of the profit was well over $1,000. While the long hours and the incessant work connected with selling customers and buying stock may have seemed like drudgery to many, it was fun to Penny. Merchandising was his field. This was the work he wanted to do, and here was the opportunity. All he needed was the energy to put the business over, and he had plenty of that and to spare. By 1904, J.C. Penney had opened his third store. It was about this time that T.M. Callahan and his first partner decided to separate. They offered to sell their interest in the three stores to Penny. He lent the needed amount to buy, but such was their confidence in him they accepted his note for $30,000. The stores were known at this time as the Golden Rule Stores. The annual idea J.C. Penney developed from the very beginning was the building of managers. He built up his men and sent them out to open new stores. They in turn likewise built up managers and sent them out to open still other new stores. In this manner, each new store would accumulate enough capital to start the next store. Each manager who opened a new store, of course, shared in the profits of that store. Thus each man selected by J.C. Penney to branch out developed not only business but men to handle the business. Here was the idea and the vision. One look at the recent sales figures, running well over $250,000,000 shows it succeeded.
The story of Morning Glory tomato juice. The Sneed family of Evanston, Illinois, were up against it just as thousands of other families were in the early days of the Depression. Two sons ready to go to Dartmouth and father Sneed out of a job. A less determined family. might have decided that luck was against them and let it go at that. But the Sneeds are not quitters. So they put their heads together and decided to get the agency for some lime drink which would mix with native gin and see if it could not be sold to the supposedly well-to-do people along Chicago's North Shore. But the North Shore did not get very much excited about the Sneed family's limericky. One day when the Sneed spirits were down close to zero, a friend on a downstate farm sent the family a case of very fine seed tomatoes. Not knowing what butter to do with them, Mrs. Sneed decided to convert them into tomato juice. Being a good neighbor, she sent a few bottles next door. The neighbors made a great fuss over it. Mrs. Sneed began to wonder if perhaps her husband and the boss might not be able to do better selling tomato juice the way she fixed it than they were selling limericky. The family went into a huddle, and since the limericky business was getting no better fast, they decided to try Mother Sneed's idea. They would call it Morning Glory Tomato Juice because it made you feel glorious, regardless of how badly you may have felt the night before. The idea of fresh, homemade tomato juice squeezed from choice seed tomatoes took hold in great shape. The Sneeds charged more than the grocery stores charged for tomato juice, but nobody complained. People are that way. The late Colonel Simmons used to say, the recollection of quality remains long after the price is forgotten. The Sneeds were careful to keep the quality up by making arrangements with a chap who grew tomato seeds and therefore had the choicest varieties. They took over his entire crop and squeezed and seeded it for him. In that way they not only obtained juice that had a superior flavor, but they got their raw materials at rock-bottom prices. Most important, however, it gave them a talking point, and a good talking point may mean the difference between success or failure. It was not long before the Sneeds were selling all the tomato juice they could make in their kitchen factory and had to enlarge their facilities. They rented a plant alongside the railroad tracks and began to think in terms of a nationwide market. They considered all the various ways of getting distribution. They thought of selling through brokers, as so many food product manufacturers do. But the brokers told them their price was too high. They thought about employing collegemen to sell house to house. But that idea would take too much capital. Finally, they determined to stick to the plan they had so successfully used on the North Shore. So they picked out a few social leaders in selected cities, people like the Drexels and Biddles of Philadelphia, and wrote and told them about Morning Glory Tomato Juice. The idea of serving tomato juice that was made to order had a real appeal. The orders began to come in. When Amar Sneed had the endorsement of these prominent people, he went to the exclusive hotels in those cities and gave them the opportunity to serve the Same brand of tomato juice to their guests as the first families in the city. Served on their breakfast tables. With the hotels lined up, the idea of serving Morning Glory tomato juice was next suggested to the railroads. The Pennsylvania lines, always alert for something better, ordered a trial supply and featured it on the menus of their crack trains. Next, the Illinois Central Fuel. In line. In that way, Morning Glory tomato juice got advertising worth thousands of dollars without the Sneeds having to spend a thin dime. Before long, the Sneed business was going big guns. Today, what started out as a stopgap during the worst period of the Depression is now a full-fledged business handling not only tomato juice but other food products as well. This family's hard-earned success simply proves the often overlooked truism that to sell the masses, first sell the classes. How the great Wanmaker business started. J. Owen Wanmaker had saved $1,900. His brother-in-law, Nathan Brown, had $1,600 that he was willing to risk in a partnership. Why not begin, said Wanmaker to his brother-in-law. He figured that any time was a good time to begin provided you really did begin. Business conditions were bad. The National Depression that had followed the closing of many banks in 1857 had caused unemployment, low wages, and the demoralization of manufacturers and wholesalers. Philadelphia, especially, was saturated in gloom. It was 1861, the threshold of the Civil War. However, Wanmaker's mind had been made up, and in February 1861 he signed a lease that put his store into business. At 23 he was ready to assume the responsibilities of business regardless of national affairs, business conditions, or the Wilmot advice of friends who had tried to discourage him from the undertaking. The store fixtures cost $375 and some clothing fabrics $739. The store opened April 8, but little was sold for several days. Plenty of people passed the store, but very few entered it. Then the books showed an entry of $24.67 worth of gentlemen's collars, cuffs and neckties sold April 18. In the meantime, the $3,500 which John Wanmaker and his brother-in-law had scraped together was fast disappearing. It was just a question of how much longer they could hang on. Fortunately, there was an opportunity to buy the stock of a clothing manufacturer who was nervous over the effect which the war might have on business. Wanmaker took over the stock on 30 days dating and invested all the money he had left, $24, in 6 advertisements in the Philadelphia newspapers. This happened on 27 April 1861. The advertisements did what was expected of them, and the entire stock was sold in 2 weeks. From then on, the business grew under the Wanmaker policy of putting every dollar that could be spared into advertising. by 1869 Wanmakar and Brown were the largest retail dealers in men's clothing in the United States. With the death of Nathan Brown, John Wanmakar and Company was organized to do a general business. Today it is one of the great stores of the world and a monument to faith in advertising. It was Wanmaker's method to expand constantly and depend upon advertising to fill in the open spaces. What his rivals called his foolhardiness was grounded in a supreme faith in the power of advertising to build volume, and the realization that volume attracted volume. When business came upon any dull times or during a panic, it was always Wanmaker's policy to increase and expand his advertising appropriation as his sales increased. Mrs. McDougall turned $30 into $1 million. When Alice Foote McDougall of New York City was left a widow in 1907. With 3 little children to support, she turned to the only work she knew. Outside of handling her household duties, coffee blending. With a capital of $30, she decided to continue her husband's coffee broking business. It was uphill work. There was much antagonism on the street, and coffeemen in the business gave her just 6 months to last. However, she gradually became established, and the 6 months passed. Her little office included a borrowed desk and a second-hand chair. Not only did she have to overcome the prejudices against a woman in this business, but she had to learn the simplest routine of running a business. Most of Mrs. McDougall's accounts were clubs, hospitals, and sanitariums. In the beginning, she solicited orders by mail, but she realized that she would have to make personal calls to secure more business. She mapped a radius of 75 miles from New York and traveled this territory for several years. 2 years after she started in business, she was taking in $20,000 a year. However, the profit on this amount was small, as the net profit on each pound of coffee was only about 4 cents. Several years later, having built up a reputation for good coffee, she opened a small coffee shop in the Grand Central Terminal, serving coffee and simple foods. Within a year from the time the shop opened, she was serving 8,000 customers a month. Gradually, this shop led to a chain of 6 eating places, each patterned after a typical European scenic spot. Mrs. McDougall was a success. People flocked to her restaurants. They liked the lovely foreign atmosphere. Her tea rooms at this time earned as high as $1,684,000 a year. Then came the Depression. In 1932, like many another, Mrs. McDougall went broke. The 6 restaurants went into receivership. Mrs. McDougall, however, had fought business difficulties before and came out ahead. She didn't cry, stop now. At the age of 65, she made a comeback and is now the mistress of a chain of 3 restaurants. She is again stressing atmosphere in her restaurants, and the public is once more putting its stamp of approval on her undertaking by giving these restaurants its patronage. Once more Mrs. McDougall is on her way to making an outstanding success. How Otto Schnurring made his first $1,000. It was back in 1914 that Otto Y. Schnurring, then 21 years old, went into business for himself. He had only a few dollars capital. He rented a little office and established himself as a manufacturer's agent, struggling along against unpredictable odds but gaining business experience. Then came what he thought to be his real break. In 1916 he learned of a candy-making machine he could buy for $100. Fortunes have been made in the candy business, thought Schnurring, so he bought the machine. The first day the machine was delivered, he put it into operation. He worked until midnight and made a batch of what he believed to be very fine candy. The next day he took this candy and arranged with a few shopkeepers to sell it for him on consignment. Then he returned to his office and made up a second batch. He was to discover that his candy did not go well. When he made his second call, very little of it had been sold. This did not discourage him. He had embarked upon a career as a candy manufacturer. The thing to do, he figured, was to find out why his candy didn't sell and then make candy that would sell. Unwittingly, Schnurring had made a mistake that thousands of others had made when they decide to go into any kind of manufacturing business. He made a product that he liked instead of one the public liked. There are thousands of manufacturers today who are slowly going bankrupt because they do not follow this simple principle. They often try to force their ideas on the public when it would be so much easier to make something that the public actually wanted. It did not take Schnurring long to discover his mistake. He found out that three types of candies sell best, namely chocolate, caramel candies and candies containing peanuts. He concentrated on making candies of this type and his candies sold, though not as well as he anticipated. Schnurring then experimented with many kinds of candy bars. It took him 3 years before he had hit upon the ideal combination, one blending chocolate, caramel and peanuts, and the way the candy public took to this bar justified his experiments. He later decided to call the bar Baby Ruth, because the word baby was familiar to every small child and adult, and because the common name Ruth was easily pronounceable by man and child. He priced it at 5 cents. The success of this bar was immediate. To make a candy bar that will sell successfully does not require a candy making machine. You can start in your own kitchen and by following the principles outlined above may, in a few days, work out the formula for a successful selling bar. Candy formulas are not subject to copyright, but the trade name of the product may be registered in the Bureau of Patents and Copyrights, and its use denied to anyone but yourself. The experience of every candy manufacturer, however, would indicate that the best kinds of candy to make would be candies made from chocolate, since chocolate Candies are always in demand. Kitchen made candies, chocolate creams, dip, caramels and other types sell butter because they are fresher and there is an unlimited demand. A market is always ready in the local stores where goods list on consignment, that is, with the understanding that you will take them back if not sold within a specified time, are generally accepted.